on behalf of the Kings Mountain Association. We are super excited to be continuing on. And we are recording this evening's event, which you will know if you're watching it in a recording. But if you're online now, just know that if people ask you about it, be sure to let them know that they can watch this. We'll be posting it like we always do. And I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who is going to do our special introduction this evening.
All right. I'm Eric Salt, and I am fortunate to be a friend and know Ann McCormick. And I've known a long time. I don't know how to count all the years because I've been here and then I moved and came back. But Ann is such an amazing person in giving. She's just a giver, and her knowledge, obviously you've read a little bit of the bios and stuff. Obviously she's highly educated, Ph.D. and all that. We're sitting in the park one day talking, and she said, "Did you know I was a nun?" And I'm like, "What?" And I had no idea. And then I, as years have gone on, all these different facets, which we're going to hear about some of them tonight, you don't know that your neighbor is such an amazing person. It was great that I was able to get to talk to her and to learn more about her and know about her. And I'm proud to call her my friend. And with that, I'm going to introduce Ann McCormick.
I'm so pleased to be with my friends. I give talks around the world, but it's much more fun to be home and know some of you and maybe meet new ones. Tonight, I'm going to talk about how creativity unfolds in children's learning software and how it unfolded in my life. And so it's a perspective that I have some things that happened before I got to Kings Mountain because they helped motivate what I did here. And then I've been here 45 years, so I've done a lot of different projects, and I'm going to share those with you, the ones about children. Ah, shoot, I can't see my... Creativity unfolds over time within limits, and that's my theme, that creativity can be wild and free, but it's limits that gives it some focus. Nature, the grandest creation, displays a few shapes, each with wildly varying expressions. The dance of divergence is balanced by natural limits. The same is true of learning game design. How does this work? Let's look at a few examples in nature. I just always start here because it's so inspiring to me. One of the shapes is branching, like in a tree or a spider web or in computer code, that things spread out and keep going. And in case you don't recognize her, that's Methuselah in the little line drawing. The second shape is the meander, like a wall, a river, or a snake. And it's a natural process that, for example, in a river, silt builds up and the river turns. So that shape we can see everywhere. Another one is the spiral, which is in a sunflower, a galaxy, a ram's horn, a nautilus shell, and so many other things in nature. The helix is like a spiral that is 3D. And so there's a model of DNA, a roller coaster, and an apple peel. Then another shape is the sphere, a moon of Saturn, a water drop, and the Earth. A friend of mine was asked by a 5-year-old, "Why is the Earth round?" And he showed a video of an astronaut pouring water in space, and it forms a perfect sphere, which is really neat. And also there's the hexagon, which is one of my favorite shapes, like a honeycomb, a snowflake, pattern blocks, and in the middle of the little pictures is chicken wire. And that's just a really strong way and flexible way of using hexagons. To create learning software games, you have to understand the limits of the device, like define the inputs and outputs. The child, what's fun, how learning works, which is what I've studied my whole life. And a topic, like how to reveal the essence of something, not just give a lot of details. So the limits change over time. For me, they've changed from Reader Rabbit, which many of you helped me test. You're grown up now, you're about 40, to Reader Bee, which is the most recent project I'm doing with another friend from Kings Mountain. Reader Rabbit was released in 1983, and notice how grainy it looks. It was on an Apple II with 6 colors in high res, 64K of RAM, 25, and there are only 25,000 Apple IIs anywhere that a child could use them. That's all the people that had one. And they used floppy disks. There was no hard drive, no internet. So everything had to go on one disk. And what we showed was every word in the English language, and we could look at the first letter, the first consonant, the middle vowel, or the last consonant. So it's all about 3-letter words. But when I said every word in the dictionary, I meant every 3-letter word. But we tested them with hundreds of people and found which ones people objected to, like gun. I'm happy to say that we didn't use that. And then in 2014, we launched Reader Bee, which deals with similar concepts, but now there are millions of colors, 128 gigabytes of RAM, 250 million iPads in the world, and high-speed internet to deliver it. You see the difference? I mean, that's just such an enormous difference in what we can do. I'm going to play a little video of this very wonderful child.
House. Take me to my car. Car.
That's Soren, my grandson, playing Reader Bee when he was really little. But let's go back to the beginning of my story. It explains why I did what I did. Before being on Kings Mountain, I was a sister of St. Joseph of Peace for 6 years. When I left, I taught school in East Buffalo at an all-Black school. And that really set me up to be determined to do something for those kids, because I had been so privileged. Even as a nun, we lived in beautiful estates with gorgeous trees, and we lived a simple life, but we had what we needed, like food and books. And when I left teaching in Buffalo in a year because it was so hard. I just didn't feel effective. And I'd wanted to be a teacher since I was a little girl, but I thought I'll go to a great school and learn more. So I went to Berkeley and I studied play and learning. I got a teaching credential and I wrote a dissertation about Black dialect reading and teaching style in first grade. And I'm really proud that that book has been used as a textbook for over 35 years at Yale and Stanford and Harvard and UC. And I was asked by Berkeley to give the 100th anniversary commencement address because they wanted one of their own that they're proud of. That just feels so good. Then I went to work in schools in the East places, like in 14 different school districts. And I just was illustrating the doing a dissertation with a chart I found yesterday on the internet, and it's typed on a typewriter because it came out in 1972. But isn't that funny that I can find it now on the internet? The styles of teaching ranged from the interrupting approach where kids were constantly corrected by white teachers to what I call the Black artful approach, which was people who could speak fluent Black dialect in a way that engaged and made a connection with the children. Then they would switch to standard English, even hypercorrect standard English. So the kids had the lowest dialect scores and the highest reading scores. And I'm still trying to get that so that we can do it for lots of little Black kids whose lives matter too. When I came to Kings Mountain, I found the Methuselah tree, which I'm sure you all know, and I used to crawl inside to meditate, which I would love to do. Do you recognize? I'm looking out of the tree cave in one of those pictures. I worked during the daytime at AIR and SRI on packaging effective reading and math projects. There were 6,000 that the government gave us as effective. And we could only find 6 that held up, that they gave the tests on the norm dates. And we were very strict about the statistics and how the methodology of the studies working, because we wanted to be really good to be worth packaging for other people. So we wrote how-to kits, tested them in 19 cities. Each city got $100,000 to test them. And my job was to analyze why they worked. There was really only one data point, which is it works, but we didn't know why. You couldn't count all those variables. We only had a sample size to know that something was going on that was special. So I wrote and edited the kits, and I was in charge of figuring out the model, which was a nice big job for somebody in her 20s. It took 5 years, it cost $5 million, and it had almost no impact, which just really bothered me because it was put in the government printing office almost at cost, but nobody knew it was there. It wasn't marketed. And so I thought, okay, to have impact, we need marketing. So I decided to found a software company of my own, but I'd never touched a computer with my own hands. I put little cards in little cubbies and got printouts back. The microcomputer was quite new. It was about 1978. But I heard from the person who managed the development of those project information packages that they had grants and I could write a 9-page proposal and win an award. So I won an Apple II and $1,000. And I only read the manuals and journal articles. I had a stack of intelligent machine journals on the floor. And after my little child went to bed, I'd read those. That's how I educated myself. I never had one course that involved computing because there weren't any computers that except in a computer science department that were mainframes when I was in school. The first project I proposed, I did because the head of the Apple Foundation wanted this topic. I wanted to do something completely different. And she said, no, this would be better. Do above and below, left and right. And look at the rainbow in number 1 has rain below it. That's above and below a line I put on the keyboard. And then we made a blue divider left and right. And the children could press anything to make parts of the butterfly appear. And then we had all 4 where the windmill is, above and above left, above right, etc. And the idea was that then the 4th game was about P, B, Q. What's the 4th letter that has that shape? I can't think of it right this minute. But that was the first program. And I had to do that for $1,000, which was hard. I was 2 years working on it. And, without pay. So Eric said, Anne, you do work, you get pay. He had to teach me that. But I really liked doing it and I learned a lot. And Apple Public Relations Department sent a London Times reporter the first day of the first field test. And my daughter was about 2 years old or 3 at Bing School. And she came and wrote a report, and it's going to come up later what happened because of that. Also, Apple gave about 10 grants at that time, and they had decided not to give me one.
Steve McCormick.
I'm sorry, I'm going to turn that off. Okay.
Steve McCormick.
Shoot. I'm sorry, I'm turning it off. Okay, I think it will keep ringing. Sorry, should have done it before. Anyway, they brought me to the National Educational Computing Conference from Apple and gave me an award for design and programming excellence. And that meant so much to me. They gave me a framed copy of the award, and I'm still proud of it, even though it was the little first award. Then when I brought my computer home from the office, the kids would notice it. They'd look at in the back of my VW Rabbit to see if I brought my Apple II. Then they came over to play games, the whole neighborhood. And they first played Colossal Cave, which I had a disc of. And I don't know, I wish you could answer. If you knew Colossal Cave, it was all text, it was on a mainframe, it was all uppercase text, because that's all you could get. And it started, you were inside
Excuse me, Anne, if you want to ask a question at any time, we can have people put answers in the chat, and I'm happy to read that back to you.
Yeah, tell me if you played Colossal Cave. It was also at SRI, but it was made by Will Carruthers at Bolt, Beranek, and Newman on a mainframe computer in 1976. So you read the text, and this is what the little kids did. You're inside a building, a well house for a large spring. There are some keys on the ground here. There's a shiny brass lamp nearby. There's food here. Then you type in what you want to do next, like pick up key, and then you can unlock. Great. Well, what was interesting is 3 years later, Warren Robinette at Atari came out with Atari Adventure that was like Colossal Cave. Notice there's a grate on the floor, there's a key, and he made a new concept, which was the yellow area at the top, which has a castle and a key, is a room. That's your whole screen. But if you go off the edge of the screen, you're in another room, which is the green area down below. So you can take the key down and unlock something. But there's some kind of dragon down there. You have to get the Holy Grail and take it back to the castle. And there's a number of rooms down there, maybe 15 on the Atari VCS machine.
And
So that,
Eric, sorry to interrupt, Dan. Eric writes that he believes he played it on Atari. So you did have a
cool.
response. Yes.
That's really nice. Thank you. What interests me is you're limited by a mainframe computer with text. That's what you get. And then with graphics, there was graphics interactive software at Atari, and that was quite a breakthrough. So you can see the difference, but they have similar elements, which I find interesting too. At that time, Steve Jobs had the idea for the Apple Foundation. His girlfriend teamed up with me to create a company. I met her through the Lawrence Hall of Science, where she worked. Steve did our first financial projection and said, the education software market is a place, not a market. He didn't really want her doing that because there were only 25,000 microcomputers anywhere on Earth that were in a home with children or a school, but very, very few in schools. So we had to create our own compiler to write software. It was not the easiest thing to start a software company in '78. However, Steve introduced his girlfriend and me, and she doesn't want her name used, so I don't acknowledge her. He introduced us to Dan Filestra, who had the most successful software company. At that time, it was Personal Software. It became VisiCorp later, and they released the spreadsheet. He had won VC funding. I think he was the first to ever get it. And I gave him my business card saying I was the president. And he, it was funny because I had no employees. And he said, I'd feel better if you had written one line of code, which I still remember like 40 years later. Dan Filestra introduced to Mitch Kapoor, who later founded Lotus. And Mitch said, Ann, you need a programmer. So he found Warren Robinette, who had done that Atari Adventure game. I heard from a friend at IBM that the National Science Foundation was offering grants. So I wrote a proposal in one weekend. I'd never written one before, but in interviews, people ask me, how did you write a proposal? I said, I followed the directions. And a lot of people don't. Like if it says, what is the problem? I said, the problem, and underlined it and then wrote the problem in the right order, because now I've served on evaluation committees for grants, and they've got a form to fill out with points for every section. So luckily I knew to be very exact about what they were asking, and it wasn't easy, especially at a weekend. I don't know how I did it. I guess I was young. So we won $130,000. Steve didn't want his girlfriend to be involved, so she was not a partner anymore. But by then I had great introductions. I had a great lawyer, Gordy Davidson at Fenwick and West. He is still my lawyer so long later. Once I was talking to him about paying him for a project, and he said, Ann, your ability to pay is somewhere between a nun and a first grade teacher. We're not going to talk about it right now. And he still helps me pro bono on nonprofit projects. Regis McKenna was our PR agency, and their people handled Steve Jobs' account and also our account. So if at that time Donahue wanted Steve, they said, well, you have to take Ann too. So I got on Donahue twice, and in 300 articles a year, Fortune, Business Week, Psychology Today, and so forth. And I had the great software architect. And one day we were sitting on the floor of an office we were going to rent. There was no furniture yet. It was country offices in Portola Valley. And in the air, he drew an and, an or, and a not gate. So in an and gate, which you see at the bottom of this screen, if both of those little plug parts are turned on, then the output is turned on. The inputs are the two wires, and the output is one wire. The or, if either one, either one or the other is on, then the output is on. In the not, if the input is on, then the output is not on. Well, Warren told me that with those three symbols and what they mean, you can make every piece of hardware and software in the world. Well, that just really fascinated me. I didn't get it too well drawn in the air. He didn't draw it on paper. But I thought, well, that's like the ABCs for reading. Children should learn that. So I said, let's do that with our grant. And I had proposed it for logic and geometry for young, gifted, Black dialect speaking children. And when I talk at Stanford or another university, I say, this is the most important thing I'm going to tell you. Put a hook in any proposal, because they're going to get thousands and they're going to remember something if you say it, if it's interesting. So that was my hook, but I really knew that the children were bright. At the bottom of the proposal comments, people would say, I don't like that part about Black dialect. Or there aren't any gifted Black dialect speaking children. And I knew otherwise because I'd taught them. Anyway, it turns out that 6 seconds of speech used up the entire memory of the Apple II without any graphics or other games. So I couldn't use voice for a commercial product. So I just put it in the back of my mind to keep working on it. So I talked about the rooms that Warren invented. Well, on the Apple II, he could have 64 rooms. So this was on an Apple II Plus, namely mine, with 48K of random access memory, 6 colors and high res. And this was a breakthrough in real-time interactive learning. The little screen with a raccoon on it, we called Rocky the raccoon. He would dance if you got things right. So Warren has hooked up 3 sensors, a diamond sensor, a blue sensor, and a cross sensor. And if any of those shapes go through the target area, the boot will kick them out and you'll get a score for it. So you have to solve the problem by hooking up something that'll solve the problem. And Warren made 36 games from easy to hard. And at first he just had a cursor an alligator chasing the cursor in the top picture with a green boundary. And you could control the red cursor with your joystick and turn on the boot, which would kick the alligator. But that didn't, then he had gates sitting there and there wasn't a use for them. So I said, you got to make a use for each gate and introduce them gradually. So I didn't write the game, but I did shape it. And then Leslie Grimm finished it. Then there was a kid playing Rocky's Boots. And it turns out you'd have to go like 7 rooms away to bring a wire back, and another, go back 3 rooms up and over to get a gate. It was tedious to bring all the parts you need to solve the problem. So he said, let's make a bag of holding. So instead of a room, we'll have the leftmost one is a room with robots in it. The middle one is a robot. You can stand on the robot and you see inside it. Well, it's really just a room reprogrammed, but you can hook up a grabber, an antenna, a bumper, battery, and so forth. And on the right side with the turquoise walls, you could also make a room into a chip. And so a chip, you could program inside the chip, then burn it into ROM and then put chips inside of chips 36 deep, which was astonishing. I was invited to show it at Xerox PARC, but I let the kid who programmed it do it because it was such a feat. And they looked for a mainframe to see if they were looking for an umbilical cord to a mainframe because they couldn't believe we did that on Apple II. And it got high critical acclaim, but not a lot of purchases because gates and robots and chips aren't in the standards. There's no standards because you couldn't do them without this interactive medium. So something I've done for a long time is not just accept the standards and meet them, but do what you couldn't do with blackboards and chalk and books. So the little company, when it was funded with National Science Foundation, Gordy Davidson incorporated it. And the first year we sold $1 million of the software. We created 16 products. We got venture capital, I think the second year, with venture capital funding with New Enterprise Associates as the lead. We formed alliances with market leaders like IBM, Atari, Radio Shack. So we sold to the Apple market with Apple, to the home market with American Express. Well, that was brilliant to get marketing, because the trick was we had very good software. We didn't have budget for marketing like these people did, but they wanted to feature the software, and we rode on their coattails, and we got out and known so widely that it was wonderful. And my job was to guide the design of every product. I made it my job. They didn't necessarily like it, but Warren objected a lot, and years later came and said, yeah, that was the best work of my life. And that's what I found, that I was taught like a tough teacher, but they appreciated it eventually, but not at first. Every title won national awards and high critical acclaim. And I gave 300 interviews a year. I was, in a lot of books. So thanks, and that was all, it wasn't because of what I did. It was Regis McKenna did Apple's PR, and we became very well known. And just as they featured Steve at Apple, they featured me at TLC. It was really a whole team that did the work, but I got famous. It was pretty handy. So my story was written for Fortune, Businessweek, Time, lots and lots of publications, and authors wrote about me in 3 books. One was High Tech, Window to the Future. It's got a little chip in that black spot, which is kind of cool, a real chip. In 1984, in December, I remember, because I had just moved to a new house in the park, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. And I think my VCs read the newspaper and said, what a good idea, let's fire Ann. And they did. And I got 3 months severance, and that was it. It was over. But I had seen Jaron Lanier's work. He's kind of a father of virtual reality, and he was a kid also. He had fuzzy hair, and I had to have him take him to restaurants to get food. And I loved what he did. He did 3D program and programmed software to use this bodysuit, which has a very special glove. And I have one if you ever want to see one. And what you could do is move your hand, and the glove would do things on the screen to mirror what you did. So you could point and fly. You could fly like Warren Robinette by then was at NASA, and he made a virtual reality simulation of jet fuel design. And it was a gorgeous spiral of molecules of gas. And sorry about the barking. You could fly towards it and it would get huge. Then you could pick it up and turn it like you were grabbing the fabric of the universe. And it was very compelling. So by that time I worked at the Nueva School, and I had the kids learn how to make their own virtual realities in about 1984, which is pretty early. And Jaron helped, and he sent someone to teach the kids 3D. The author of the graphics software came and taught graphics there. And it was really fun to do these advanced things, which Nueva let me do. I was also hired to teach principals in Cupertino, and I worked for Model Technology Schools, and the superintendent of public instruction asked me to be on the state school board. So being adventurous was turning out well. And also one of our trips was to Bell Labs to show virtual reality, and we just did many things. One time I was going to leave to pick up my daughter, and Jaron said, well, you might want to stay because the Dalai Lama and Leonard Bernstein are stopping by. It's like, oh, that's the way it was around there. So I've had a lot of fun in my life. More fun than the con, I'll tell you for sure. As much as I learned there, it was fun to do that. By the way, they didn't come that day, but we met a lot of interesting people. Well, before I was pregnant with my 44-year-old daughter, I met Karen Stone McCown, and she's someone I love almost most in the world. And I had read about the Nueva School, which she founded, and I remember thinking to myself, I'd almost have a child to send him to Nueva. I knew what they did, but I'd never been there. And Karen wrote a book called Self-Science, The Subject Is You, after she talked to a large number of Nobel laureates about what they wished they'd had in their childhood. She found that kids with handicaps were well served, like by the Armstrong School, and the people not being served were gifted kids. So she asked a number of gifted people, including Yehudi Menuhin, the violinist, what they wish they'd learned in school. And they said, every single one said, I wished I knew how better to relate to myself and other people because my life would have been happier. I would have I would have won my Nobel Prize, but it could have been better. So she studied for a year and wrote this beautiful book, which is still available. Karen hired me and to create software about the math specialist at Nueva. I had made a video disc of her while I was doing some other projects for little kids. And she saw it and she said, how did you get Mary in that computer? And so she thought it'd be great to she had two missions at Nueva. One was to make a design example of the school, and the other is to share what was learned at Nueva with everybody in the world. The idea wasn't to be exclusive or small, but to share it widely. And the wonderful thing is we really are now. So I applied for grants and won from the National Science Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, the US Department of Education, and others, and started creating prototypes. And we turned Mary Laycock into Miranda Dragon, who's the dragon in the middle staring at you. See your little glasses? They're a takeoff on Mary's glasses. And we did 3D on the web. And this particular game with a little raccoon in it, children count to 10 writing numbers, and then when they trade in 10 little blocks for a long block that has 10, so then they put 1 in the middle column and 0 in the units column, so that's 10, 1, 10, and 0 units. They do that to 1,000 and they understand place value ever after, and which is one of the harder concepts in math. They also do base 4 and other bases, and all in the first grade, but they only do about 10 minutes at a time. So we made that into a game, and it would be a really cool app. Maybe we'll do that soon. We also made Half Moon Bay Farm, which was about shapes in nature, just like those I started with. But I featured the hexagon, and we started by giving children 7 apples, and they fit how many would fit around one, and they could count around them and not be able to stop by the, sometimes they'd keep going if they didn't put their finger on the first one. These are kindergarten children. Then we showed blowing bubbles so that 6 bubbles fit around one, and we could, in a video, we could draw on the bubbles to show how they formed, but they come together more like the hexagon than circles. And then we showed how bubbles, the next really is the beehives. You can see in a video that the bees put their little bodies inside the beehive and it's pushed together around their bodies and it naturally forms hexagons. Then we used Mary's hexagon blocks to say how many blocks fit around one and how many blue blocks fit around one. And there's always 6. And there was a toolkit and so forth. So that's a beautiful little app that never came out, but I'd still like to do it because somebody met me that wanted to bring it out and they said, it has conceptual elegance. I thought, that's true, it does, because I based it on Mary's work. And I want to know if Craig Culver's here or anybody in the Culver family. If you could text me, that would be nice. In 1985, Craig Culver told me about an efficient keyboard based on sets of 3 letters called trigrams that occur most frequently in English. So there's a professor in Texas named Edward Montgomery who studied this his whole life and looked at the brown corpus, which is a huge list of words. And he found the things that should come together on the keyboard instead of being kept apart. You know, typewriters were made to slow you down so you don't do TH and they get caught. But there's no physical keys anymore, so they aren't getting caught. So on this little keyboard inside the turquoise box, right in the middle is the, and it's got he, her, here, there, it, whither, all in one line, and and. There's also it, is, in, of. The little words that are so frequent that you have to type, you can do in one stroke. And if you have 1 billion words, half are one stroke on this keyboard. But that's keeping repeated words like the. It's not just 1 billion unique words. It's taking letters and books and websites and so forth. So we use that for urban illiterate teens. Guess why I wanted to do that? It's because of my work in East Buffalo. So I made the hood with someone who came from Finland. I'd visited Finland, and an artist came over and stayed at Michael Powers A-Frame at Miramar Beach. And together we made the hood with games that were about basketball, poetry by Black poets. It's a beautiful thing. And I easily got venture capital showing it. But as soon as we got the venture capital, the investor said, well, that's not a market we can serve, so forget it. So I still haven't gotten to do the work for Black kids, except showing what we could do. While I was at Nueva and also VPL, I consulted to Advanced Labs about software creation because we were starting to do really nice advanced work on the team. And I worked for Apple Advanced Technology Group, HP, IBM, AT&T, Northern Telecom, Pacific Bell. I flew all over the country doing presentations that influenced them about what software could be. Because I think we had the best software anybody had. 35 companies donated hardware and software to Nueva. We got hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of donations from one letter. And that was, Bill Atkinson was interested in my dissertation about Black dialect and reading. And I went to see him and showed him Mary's Math. He showed it to John Scully at Apple. And we got a Mac lab free right away. And he spent a year with us 2 days a week. And it was wonderful. And then I was invited to work with the ATG guys. It's so fun to be with brilliant people that are funny and smart. I love it. But I remember him sitting on the floor in a circle. Mary Laycock came and gave a presentation for them and worked with them. And it was like little boys, but they were these, high priests of Apple. It was great. And museums invited me to visit and share ideas. And this was really, I put this in because it's so funny. The Smithsonian Natural History Museum in DC, I went to see because they invited me. And they set up an exhibit at Washington, DC that had a paleontologist chipping away on rocks to get the bones out. And they wanted to similarly at the Presidio have a glass room like they had at the History Museum, but my team would be in the glass room and everybody around the world could watch us on two-way TV. Well, it's a very interesting thing to think of being really on display to do our work. I was amused by it, but I had to bring the money for it. And we didn't make enough money to support that. So we'll come back to them when we have more money. I also consulted about Nueva and Schools of the Future around the world. I worked with 15 countries who sent their teams of people, their educational publishers, we had seminars that people came to, and they in the middle of Sao Paulo, Brazil, I spoke in the Congress of the Latin Americas on two-way TV with Portugal and all over Brazil. And the left-hand picture is the beautiful library in the National Library of Finland in Helsinki. They brought me to Finland twice to help revise the schools of the whole country. That was such an honor. And I was in the design charrette with people for a week trying to come up with the best approach. And I just described what Nueva did. And they had me speak for the whole group, saying what we could do. I also went to China. That's the path with the camels is in Nanjing. And I met the people who had the National Science Teaching Center, the person in charge of educational technology for the whole country and science teaching and so forth. And I did that as part of my current project, which I'll share more with. We won more venture capital funding. It was $3 million, with Mordé Vidal and Greylock taking the lead. But the company decided not to build on our work at Nueva and ended our involvement, which is a nice way of saying they fired me. 4 months after we got the venture capital. That's quite frustrating, as you can imagine. But the consulting at Apple paid off. That company took our intellectual property that we had developed and put into the company because we thought we were part of it. But Apple just had paid for a lot of it and I had delivered it to them under a contract. And they just brought it back to me, gave it to me. That was really nice of Atari ATG. Next, Viacom funded us, Viacom Interactive. and they wanted 3D development, and the 3D programming took an awful lot of the effort because it was so crude at that time. And one thing we did, we were trying to make a system that would really solve the learning problem around the world. And you can't see it very well, and there isn't time to go into it, but if you ever want to know, we had 500 research articles that we summarized. We linked those to specific skills. It's a very big development that we did. And one of the things at the bottom, it's 7 stages of learning. It's actually 8 because I added exploring. But Luria in Eastern Europe made up these, but it was very, very wordy, and I made it brief. You start by focusing a child's attention. Then the child does clumsy trying because he's not skillful yet. Then there's trials and repetitions where it makes sense to use a flashcard or 2. Then patterns start to emerge and he starts to get the basic idea. Then parts are automatic, and then when there's enough parts automatic, he reaches mastery. And I would show this to someone and say, well, that's about dance, isn't it? It was a dancer. Or somebody in marketing would say, well, that's about marketing. Those are the stages of marketing. And I say, no, it was a baby learning to walk, but it applies so broadly. And one of my friends said, those are the big alphabets that apply, like the periodic table of elements, we call a big alphabet. Next, we began work on a K1 reading software for the iPad. And I'm really proud of this work. It's the most recent. It came out in about I'll tell you in a minute, 2014. Children could move in a few minutes from hearing one sound of a letter to tracing one shape, not C as in cat and C as in scent, just one sound, because they're little and they like things one way. They open up this little set of pictures, and there's 6 consonants around one vowel. So we call that a letter daisy. And on the letter daisy, we can type cat, sat, mat, tan, can, man, ham, etc. There's 16 words that all have one sound in the 3-letter word. So they could then hear a story about a man who sat on a mat and along came a cat and he wanted a hat, and on the hat was an ant. The ant wanted a hat too. So some really important work was done by one of our other neighbors, and I didn't ask her permission to cite her, but she just did gorgeous work on being art director and writing the stories and guiding a whole lot of the work. Then the children can daisy type any words they want, and we created 9 ReaderBee apps that are now in the App Store for iPad. They're about 99 cents. The big one is $1.99, and they're still available. They're not on Android because it costs a lot of money at that time to do both. So we just did them on iPad. We won 13 national awards for ReaderBee, and I'm very proud of that too. I had 1 other Parents' Choice Awards, but this is a gold award, and I was really proud to get those awards. And of course, it was the whole team. So before I mentioned China and the camels and things along the path, someone asked me to help, had heard about me. And what happened was a guy whose mom was head of technology education for the whole country bought software for his 6-year-old, and he tried it all out. And the thing he liked the best was Learning Company software. My name was on the back of it, and he contacted me asking if he could see me. So he'd come and see me for several years. He visited, he'd just come straight from the airport up to the mountain. And we talk about things. And then when an investor there named Robert Larson wanted help with his school, he invited me. Haiming Wu is his name, which means moon over ocean. And Haiming arranged it, and I met another Chinese man named Yun Kong who's been helping. And Yun Kong later invited me to launch an online school in China. When we started, COVID hadn't started, but all during COVID, we've been working on it. And Karen and Annabelle from Nueva, and Karen was the founder and Annabelle was the head of school. And they both started Synapse School together, they're co-founders. And we're starting with 2 classes that are already successful in China. One is an English proficiency program. It's like you learn to speak English with AI watching, and they've done 1 trillion tests, individual clicks on the program over 30 years to improve it. And I am very impressed with it. I'm on their board. It's called DINED. And they have 2 million users in China, and and also many in the US. They're in about 100 countries. Well, that's a nice thing to share with people. And we might have 100 million users if the Ministry of Education approves of what we're doing and gives like their stamp on our certificates and so forth. That's what we're hoping for, but it hasn't happened yet. YK, who's helping, is going to China tomorrow, Friday. I'm meeting with him tomorrow about some details. The school is called 6arts.academy. The .academy is like .com. You could go see it even though it's not done. And what I've mainly done is write for the Ministry of Education. It's not written for human beings, like the consumer. It's written for Ph.D. people who spend their whole lives on education. And it's models that I mainly got from 6 Seconds, which is Karen and Annabelle's other company. It's an emotional intelligence company, and Synapse School. And it was inspired by Karen and Annabelle's work. And I'm really proud that they're helping. And so we might have a new school. And I got the idea, in case something goes bad with China, we'll offer it in the United States too. So right now it's mostly an idea and the beginning of a website. The website's not even finished yet. And that's it. So let's have some Q&A.
Yeah, and let me just answer. Anne, thank you so much. Okay, I have known you for years, and I learned so much that I never knew before. Some folks may have the ability to ask a question out loud. There's the Q&A, and then also there's the chat. So we would love it, actually, if you have a question, if you're comfortable, raise your hand and we'll unmute you if you can't unmute yourself and let you ask Anne the question directly. Someone talking? Otherwise, feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A, and we will make sure it gets read to Anne.
Thank you. It's sure fun to share all that.
I
I want to know if it was understandable or interesting too. Because I just kind of poured out my whole life.
Well, I have a question unless I'm missing one there. So might be hard to answer, but everything you've done, do you have a favorite project?
Yes, the big old tree on Skyline about Methuselah. I wanted to do that for years and years and years. And once I was sitting at Bucks and there was a little postcard on the table that said, "Let us help you make your dreams come true." And I said, yeah, I could, I'd like you to help my dreams come true. And so I wrote a really short proposal, like 1 page or so. And I won a grant from the Woodside Community Foundation and made a site called, well, some of you probably saw me give a talk about it at the fire brigade, but it's called Big Old Tree on Skyline because it's hard for little kids to spell Methuselah. Okay. And it has tree stories and tree stories is what happened while the tree, a story of each 100 years the tree had been alive. So inventions and discoveries from 1800 years ago, you go, oh my gosh, it was 1,000 years old when the printing press was invented in Europe, etc. So that's just to give perspective, and the kids can add other things that happened each of those centuries. And then tree neighbors, which is the native animals and plants that live in the crown and so forth. And the picture behind me is Methuselah seen from a drone. It looks like Romanesco broccoli. But I think that's my favorite.
Great. So a couple of questions have come in. Kathy Kennedy Miller asks, a lot of kids have had strange learning experiences during the pandemic. Do you have any suggestions for parents with young kids on software that might help?
I think they need to get, if they're on Zoom all the time, I would let them play outside if possible. And it's hard to answer generically. There's one thing I'm very excited about that I could recommend on an iPad or iPhone, and that is playosmo.com is a Palo Alto company that was sold to somebody in India, investors, for $100 million. And they've really increased their reach in schools and homes. I bought it and tried it out and got it for my grandson because the iPad sits in a little frame at a set angle because it's in a plastic container. And there's a little red hood over the camera. It's got a mirror in it and can look at what the children are doing with their hands on the table. So there's letters and numbers, you can make words, but you use your hands to form things or draw, and it's all captured by the iPad and the characters respond to you. So one of the things, there's a bear and he says, let's do magic. Here's a magic wand, and he draws one. Now you draw one, and he watches you. And then he reaches down, like he bends down under the screen and picks up, and he's got your magic wand. I think that is magic because it's looking at it from the camera. And then he uses your magic wand to guide things in the games. And my favorite part is, like Andor and Not in Rocky's Boots, it's teaching programming with little blocks that have loops and move up 4, move sideways 4, and you're capturing strawberries in a maze and not killing anything, which I really like. But the kids can learn a lot of logic with Osmo. And also the math is great because if you have to hold a pencil and draw a 5, that takes a lot of effort. But if you slide it onto the screen where it can be seen, you're in your kind of math brain more than your motor control. So it's for a range of ages. Playosmo.com is their website. I have nothing to do with them, though I would love to, because I think it's so smart to involve hands, not just screens. And then a Khan Academy, I think, is good with thousands of math activities. When I first heard about it, I felt like saying, that's never going to work, because Saul Khan was helping his nephew, I think, with math, and you couldn't even see him. He just talks and writes on a blackboard. That's what you get. But it's so thorough and so clear that it helps kids with their math. So they can look, kids I tutored, my neighbors, their kids could look up on Khan Academy details for just how to solve a certain problem. I think it's brilliant. Then I think Star Walk is wonderful. It's an iPad app. I don't know if it's on Android. And what it does, it uses GPS to notice where you're pointing your camera. It knows where you are on the Earth, and it knows if you're tipping it. So what it does is show the stars that you're pointing it at as if it's a camera. So you can look at the screen and oh my gosh, there's the Big Dipper. There's, Cassiopeia and so forth. But what really fascinated me is I pointed it down to the Earth. It showed the stars on the other side of the Earth because, of course, they're there. And I didn't realize, I didn't quite believe they were there. I mean, in my experience. So that's another one, Star Walk. There's another one called The Elements, which I think is brilliant. Somebody showed me a periodic table of elements, but they had a table for the table. They had all the elements physically on the table. They made an app going into details about each element. And I've used that tutoring, and there's a poster that goes with it. And you have to make up activities like noticing that the number, I forget the name of the number, the number of electrons changes one by one as you go through the periodic table, but it's beautifully done. And there's a number of others. That's something that maybe we could share, put up things that we found and make it like preschool, kindergarten to 2nd grade, 3rd to 5th, and 6th to 9th, and then high school. We could share our knowledge about that, and you can email them to me at annmccormick@gmail.com, and I'll compile them and put them up for all of us. How about that? Because it's hard to find really good software.
That's very generous.
Good. Yeah.
Man.
Well, I need it anyway. It'll help me get more good titles.
And I know that you've been very generous. So we have two more questions. I want to be sensitive to the 8 o'clock. We can stay for a little longer if you want. So Chris Reynolds asks a pretty long question, which I'll read, or you can actually see that's along the same lines. But I don't want to ignore a little bit ago. First, Betsy Ricks asks a question that I too am very interested in. I would love to hear a bit about your first 20 years. So you focused a lot. So I don't know if there's a small snippet you want to share, or if that's something that you do outside of this recording.
And then I don't think it's worth having another seminar about. I was born on an apple farm near Niagara Falls, New York. It was a waste dump of the Manhattan Project, and I was exposed to a lot of radiation, and my brother died of multiple myeloma because they store the radiation on our land. And we had igloos. We'd go up the hill, down the hill. It was really terrible. But I had an awful lot of fun in the barns, and I had horses that I rode when I was a little tiny kid, clop, clop, clop across the barn. Our barn burned down. My parents got divorced. I have one older brother, and my parents remarried a number of times. So I have 11 brothers and sisters. I went to 10 schools by 12th grade. I went to public school until my last year. I went to Marymount High School to live with my dad because my mom was horrified that I was going to be a nun. I was raised a Unitarian, so it was really unusual to do this strict thing. I was raised with a lot of liberty. So that's it, I guess, for my first years. I learned to make friends quickly because I'd never been at the same school the second year. K1-2, I was with the same kids, and in middle school, I was the same kids. 4 high schools, just a lot of change. But I think it prepared me to deal with the computer age, where things are so different, change so fast. And I like my life. I've been in the park 45 years. I love it here. And I love the stability. And I love knowing Eric since he was a little boy and so many others.
Great, thank you. That's fascinating. Actually, I'm picturing you in and out of igloos. So Chris's question is pretty long, but the basic part of the question is, Ann, are you familiar with LingoChamp? It's a Chinese company, and their products teach Chinese adults to speak English, mostly over smartphones.
I think so. I think I might have even bought it, but I'm not real familiar with it.
Okay, Chris mentions it's a family friend who developed it, formerly worked at Google. They have millions of users. I don't know how you keep track of all of the apps and software that's out there. Do you have a particular place you go to look, like a TechCrunch, or just so many people in the industry?
I go to conferences. My favorite is called Duster Magic App Camp. It's for developers, but we spend all day, we have laser pointers, and we say, is it dust or is it magic? We have anonymous, voting of how good we think the apps are, and we can comment. But I learn like 50 new apps, and I just download. I've got hundreds of apps on my iPhone and iPad, and that's my best source, because they only invite people who do really pretty extraordinary work. That's where I learned Star Walk and the elements. I met the developers.
We might have to borrow that dust or magic at our next KMA meeting. Dust or magic? It's the rose or the...
Really good way. Give everybody a little laser pointer. They're cheap, like little one, and you could just shine it at 0 to 10 on the on the chart.
And any other questions, folks? I want to just make sure I'm not missing anyone or anything. Wow. Well, and Eric, do you want to close since you opened? Now that I've put you on the spot.
I'm trying. I have to learn how to unmute.
Now you're there. We heard you.
There.
Anyway, as I said to you, Marlene, earlier, she's the most famous person I know that you just had no idea. Every time she talks, I learn so much more about her, but the passion for education just blows me away. It just blows me away how amazing that is. So with that, I'm just so happy to have you talk in, and it was a joy. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I love it. I really, I love this mountain, and I love being here, living here. I plan to stay a long time.
Excellent.
And I'm
Well,
almost 78, so